Hello! Today we are back with the King's Information Network podcast doing Chapter 3. I hope you are enjoying it so far. Without further ado, here we go. I paused in the storytelling, abruptly realizing who my once mysterious freedom fighter reminded me of. Maybe, I thought upon reflection, it was actually vice versa. I locked eyes with Jay. I met Jay over a year after the last time I'd seen his brother, and considering the circumstances in which I had last seen Bry, it didn't surprise me I hadn't made the connection earlier. I wonder if any of my friends had over the years. I'd have to ask. I rubbed absently at the scar stretching across my cheek as I, again, assessed the time by the sun filtering through the small window. There was a little light left, and I could tell it was rapidly approaching night. After the day we'd had, I had to admit I was exhausted. It's getting late, and Jay and I have had a rough day, I said, so I'm going to grab some sleep. If you'd like, we can continue once we're all up again. Yes, please, David said. Of course. He yawned and snuggled in next to his sister as I curled up, trying to get comfortable on the rocky floor. The touch on my arm some indeterminable time later brought me instantly awake. Shh, Jez, it's me, Jay whispered. I forced my muscles to relax as I sat up. What's up? Who knows? Bo and Mick. I suspect Bry did too. You now. Maybe others, especially those who were in the recovery party, considering the timing. Jasmine's death was a fairly well-publicized event. I never asked, though, and they never said. It was safer that way. He nodded, the motion barely visible in the flickering gloom of the cell. There were torches somewhere in the hallway, but the light only occasionally reached down to us. It's amazing how life can change forever in an instant, isn't it? More amazing how the world can, he said. I chuckled. So true. Think we're getting out of this one, Jezzy? Don't call me that, I said without rancor, enjoying the peacefulness of the deep night, even locked away. Jezzy was Jay's own personal nickname for me, and I generally abhorred it, even if I had probably deserved it at the time. And I don't know. You know, Bo, Jesse, and Rye will do their best. He hummed quietly in response. Well, we knew the risks coming in, even if we were trying not to get caught, he said quietly. Good night. Night, Jay. He returned to his stretch of floor, and I curled up again, but thoughts of the past that rarely came to mind anymore itched the back of my mind, until I finally managed to drift off. All four of us came awake at the sound of heavy footsteps coming our way. Stella sat up, wide-eyed. Already? She asked softly. Jay and I exchanged a glance, then I shook my head. It was far too early for that. If nothing else, they would want to hang us all as freedom fighters, even if Stella and David had nothing to do with it, just so they could say they had. That would require a big to-do, and they couldn't have gotten that organized in less than a day since they'd caught Jay and me. Food, a gruff voice announced. A man shoved a bucket of some sort of porridge in, along with 4 wooden spoons and another bucket of water. I smiled grimly at the fact they didn't open the door. I knew after what we had pulled that Jay and I would be considered dangerous. I briefly wondered if Stella and David could possibly have done something to be included in that. I mostly dismissed that idea after another glance at the pair. How anyone could find David dangerous was beyond me. I snuck a quick look at the guard, but his face rang no bells. I knew the easiest way to free us would be a move like that, but I also, realistically, knew that it was too soon for that. We made short work of the fare, and I had to admit it wasn't very satisfying. After, David turned to me. I suppose you could continue the story if you want, he said grudgingly, but I could tell his words were an act, considering only the faintest traces of dejection were still evident on his face. Stella shot him a glare. David Aaron Harper, she admonished sharply. What? It's her choice if she wants to or not, he said, with bad grace. I held up a hand, no doubt saving David from a lecture about politeness. I would like to continue, actually, I said, winking at the boy. After all, it makes a decent story and passes the time. Let's see how far we get. His grateful look was enough. I took a deep breath and started back in. As Jez wandered the caves and rooms, she discovered quickly that the group numbered a little over 100 able-bodied men and women, along with another 20 or so kids, and the space was clearly busy. She jumped in surprise when Bo appeared at her elbow around midday, trailed by a rather disgruntled-looking Mick. She had no idea he would know where to find her. Her surprise earned another one of his small smiles. Lunch, he said, gesturing back towards the main room. She nodded and fell in step beside him. She wondered if she'd say something, but Bo seemed content with the silence, so she kept quiet. To her surprise, many tables had been set up during her wandering, and she marveled at the multiple ways they used almost every space. Bo went one way, but at Mick's pointed look, she turned and sat down at an empty table instead of following, feeling very out of place and self-conscious of her bandages. As with everything else she'd observed, though, there wasn't any excess, so her table soon filled up. She thought they might ask questions, but the others simply accepted her company and filled the area with perfectly normal and cheerful conversation. They demanded nothing of her, which helped her relax. "Why don't you help in the kitchens to start?" one of the men asked her when the subject came up. She was fairly sure his name was Duncan. "I'm on kitchen duty during the day this week, and we could always use more hands. It's not easy to feed almost 150 mouths 3 times a day. Obviously, you won't be locked into that. Either Captain Bow will assign you someplace, or if you find somewhere that interests you, you could always join there too. And who knows, maybe you'll fall in love with the kitchen." He made a face even as he said this. Some of the others chuckled. "I doubt that," another man said. "She doesn't strike me as the type." "I don't mind cooking," she protested, not wanting anyone to think she was too good for any job. She hadn't cooked much as the Lockholms were well off and they had servants, but some of her favorite childhood memories were of baking with her mother. "Neither do I, and I hate kitchen duty," Duncan said ruefully to laughter. Having nothing else to do and wanting to feel useful, she took him up on his offer and spent an enjoyable afternoon helping with food preparation and listening to the conversations again, trying to get as much information as possible about this group she now belonged to. It also gave her an opportunity to sit and take things slow, which her body greatly appreciated. The next 5 days flew by. She jumped from group to group, trying to find a place to belong. Although she didn't mind the useful work in the kitchen, she saw where it would bore her in no time. Even after a week of being up and about, she still felt out of place and had to wonder when and if that would change. The only person who succeeded in taking her mind off it was her mysterious friend from the first day, whose challenge had spread quickly across Cavern Hall. No one would tell her his name, but he had an easy way that made it simple to just be herself without being Jasmine. A week after her first entrance into the Freedom Fighters, she found herself staring at a sheet of paper. On the top were 2 columns, Jas and Min. Under those were all the derivatives and possible nicknames she could think of. She had started the paper 2 days previous, but was only just getting down to the business of sorting out her name. Mick's warning echoed in her head. He repeated it regularly, but she was set on not going too far from her old name. It had to be something that would resonate with her and that she wouldn't have to spend too much time learning to respond to. She absolutely scratched out and doodled options. It had been the most recent chance encounter with Mr. Mysterious, along with an interesting session with the Master Swordsman she'd seen the first morning, which now spurred her to focus on finally coming to a decision. Early that morning, she'd walked into the kitchen looking for a quick breakfast. Somehow, unsurprisingly, he was there, peeling potatoes. She got the distinct impression he did this often and wondered if it was a form of punishment. He'd gotten impatient with her lack of name, so he'd shortened No Name to Nona, a name that had quickly spread through camp. She could only hope her new name would spread as quickly, since Nona was, at best, something one called their grandmother. That morning, most of her bandages had come off, although her left arm remained in a sling. Mick had, cranky as usual, informed her that, while she hadn't broken it, the sprain was bad, and she was not to use it at all until it was no longer hurt in the slightest. Mr. Mysterious grinned at her and then waved, handful of potato. "Looking good, beautiful," he called. She returned the smile, finding it infectious. "Morning," she called back, laughing as she snagged what she needed and headed out. Later that morning, she found herself watching a group sword practice in the main room. It was a way to pass the time when no one needed her help, as it happened this morning. She probably could have worked in the kitchens, but somehow she didn't want to work side by side with Mr. Mysterious yet. Plus, she had to admit the sword fighting interested her. She had spent many hours, as a young child, watching her older brothers train. Her father, when he thought her mother wasn't watching, had taught her a few tricks as well, but nothing that would really serve her in an actual fight. She personally thought she was a decent shot with a bow, though, since hunting was a practical activity and had been acceptable to teach her parents' only daughter. After watching for a while, she realized the girl closest to her, maybe in her mid-teens, was doing something wrong. At first, she couldn't identify what, though. Every time the girl's opponent pressed, he easily defeated her. More often than not, the attack left the girl on her backside. She hesitated as she finally spotted it, biting her lip before she rose to her feet and approached the pair. "Excuse me," she said politely, waiting for both to look at her. "I think he's beating you so easily because of your stance. You're standing flat-footed, see?" she said, gesturing at the girl's feet. Both looked down. "If you drop one foot back, it'll give you more balance and make it easier to retreat if he's pressuring you." The girl frowned and then shrugged. "Don't suppose it'll hurt to try. Couldn't do worse against Michael if I tried." The girl reset her feet, dropping one back as suggested. Jess stepped back out of the way to watch. This time, when Michael pressed the attack, the girl was forced backwards, but managed to stay on her feet, an obvious improvement. The girl grinned. "Hey, she cut off, as she glanced over the injured woman's shoulder, suddenly seeming nervous. "Thought of a name yet?" came the swordmaster's deep voice. She spun. "No, sir," she said crisply, barely remembering they didn't salute here. "Well then, Miss Nona, would you mind telling me why you told Rylea to stand that way?" After a second of indecision, she decided it was probably safer to tell the truth with no details. "It It just makes more sense, sir. Because of where your center of gravity is. It gives you more balance if you don't stand flat-footed. Flat-footed results in you on your butt, and that results in you being dead. The big man nodded, studying her thoughtfully before tossing her the extra wooden practice sword he held. She fielded it easily, but with no little surprise. Sir? Where'd you learn that? My father, she said before she could think to do otherwise. Exactly, he barked, causing her to jump. He turned, and she realized, to her great chagrin, they had been addressing the whole group of trainees. See? This girl just picked up what few of you managed to do in weeks. Use your brains, and if I catch any of you flat-footed again, there will be consequences, he ordered, scanning them all with a dangerous look. Now, back to work! A few present chorused a proper but unenthusiastic response as they moved to do as told. He spun and slashed down at her with a second wooden sword. She was ready for him, having been on her guard since he tossed it to her, suspicious of his reasoning. It proved to have been a good idea, as she threw up the sword haphazardly to block and dodged back out of reach at the same time. He grinned. Well done, lass. Figured an impromptu lesson was in order. How much skill do you have with that? He asked, nodding towards the practice sword. Very little, sir. I know how to hold it, and a few basic blocks, but that's all, I'm afraid. Well, people here have to know how to fight, so I'd say it's about time you started to learn. You fit? I'm one-armed for another couple weeks, but my right works fine. He chuckled. Then we'll take it easy to start with. Teach you the basics, and we'll switch to the hard stuff once you're back up to full strength. We'll begin now. Now, sir? She asked in surprise. No time like the present, lass. I'm Jack Reardon, but call me Reardon. Everyone does, since there seems to be too many Jacks in the world. He winked. She smiled tentatively back. Nice to meet you. And you're still Nona? For now. His eyes sparkled at her resigned tone. All right, lass. Nathaniel can watch this group for a bit while I work with you. Ready? Yes, sir. That's the spirit, he said, and stepped behind her to move her into position. We'll start with your stance, although you're already most of the way there. She came back to the present and stared down at the single name that remained after her half-hearted scribbling. She read it once, twice, and then smiled. Yes, it would do nicely. It fit her, but also this new, more complicated world she found herself in. Jez hurried out of her sleeping space. She'd been able to keep her small room for the time being due to still healing, and headed for the kitchen, which had the best fireplace. Once there, she made straight for the hearth and tossed the paper in, making sure it burned fully. The others present eyed her a bit, but made no comment. She knew it was important to heed Beau's advice on not letting anyone know who she had been. She suspected one day her anonymity might matter. As soon as the paper was gone, she went looking for Mr. Mysterious. She was pointed to what ended up being a partially empty storage room. Attempting to ignore the snickers and whispers that followed her, she headed in that direction. It took some minutes of searching to find him. When she did, she was a touch surprised to find him practicing with his sword, moving confidently in a definite pattern. It was the expression on his face that really got her, however. Grim and focused, his usual seemingly trademark grin and roguish twinkle were gone. She stopped dead, just in the doorway. For a moment, she could only watch his movement with awe, before deciding she could as easily as talk to him later, and move to creep away. He stopped his routine mid-swing, barely out of breath. Nona. It wasn't a question, but she stepped forward, raising her chin. That's not my name. He now turned to face her, eyes calculating. Oh? Then what is it? Jez. My name's Jez, she said firmly, rising to the challenge she heard in his voice. His face broke into a delighted smile, and he thrust out his free hand. I'm Brayton, but everyone tends to call me Bry. I've been known to answer to, hey, you, too. She laughed, taking his hand firmly, not at all surprised when he then shifted their grip and kissed the back of her hand just as he had the first time they'd met a week prior. A tentative tap on his doorframe brought Sorin Dakimar's head up, wondering who was disturbing him. Upon recognizing the young lieutenant, he nodded. Back from up north, I see. Yes, sir, Jackson said, now stepping inside and snapping off a tired but respectful salute. General Opalin asked me to report to you directly. Appreciated, Sorin said dryly. Well, he prompted when the young lieutenant didn't immediately continue. To be honest, sir, there isn't much to report. My scouting mission was a complete failure. We didn't even see an echo of what might have been the freedom fighters. They've disappeared from the map entirely. Not unexpected, Sorin murmured, glancing down at the paperwork spread neatly across his desk. Thoughts? Jackson eyed him. Sorin kept his face studiously blank. He and Jackson had known each other for a while, and he respected the young man, tried to nudge him in the right direction, but they both had parts to play in all of this. I think, sir, that just like us, they have taken the time since our last encounter to, well, this isn't the same group, even if it consists of some of the same people, if that makes sense. He spoke hesitantly, but Sorin suspected that was more from an uncertainty over his potential reaction than a hesitancy over his own thoughts. It does, and they know what they're doing, and they've got the advantage of also knowing what we do. Sorin tapped his fingers on the desk as he regarded the lieutenant. Do you think we're in trouble, Jackson? Again, that brief hesitation. I don't know. It's hard to say when we know so little about them. Very well. Remind Vladimir that when you turn in your report, I'd like to see it when he's done. In the meantime, you're dismissed. There'll be new orders for you in the morning. Yes, sir, Jackson said, saluting again. He shot Sorin a brief, unhindered smile before disappearing back out the door. Sorin stared after him for a minute, fingers still unconsciously beating a rhythm on the desk. He looked at the papers directly in front of him and shuffled them around, straightening them into a neat, even pile. Sorin, again, scanned them and then leaned back in his chair. Is it possible there's another Highcastle? He murmured aloud. There had been vague rumors for years that when Elizabeth Highcastle left Oakbridge over 20 years prior, she'd been pregnant, but had never been confirmed. Technically, it was impossible to confirm, considering it was reported and widely publicized that the Queen and her retinue had been killed on their journey north for a vacation. Sorin never fully believed the rumors, since Edward would have never stopped bragging if he'd managed to kill the Queen. He knew Edward had been working on things then. He'd set the stage and started a quiet campaign to destabilize things, because the bastard had up and decided he'd make a better ruler than the Highcastle family. Vlad had taken over after Edward's death, and as far as Sorin knew, that was when things had started to really move forward. At the thought of his father, or stepfather, or whatever Edward would be considered, Sorin shuddered slightly. Thrusting the old fears aside, the point remained. What if Elizabeth Highcastle had been pregnant when she left? What if she had survived and had a second child? There was only one person to ask. Sorin pushed back from his desk. It was time to have a chat with Prince Renier. End of Chapter 3. Cheered and then went abruptly silent, head whipping around. A second later, I heard it too. Footsteps. It took another before I realized it was more than one person coming our way. I glanced at Jay in surprise and held up 3 fingers. He nodded. Stella, at the same time, pulled David to her, a stubborn fear on her face. The trio reached the door and I took a good look at them. The shortest was probably rise height, so shorter than average. The larger 2 were obviously the muscle, which was not a good sign at all. Shorty stuck the keys in the door and pulled it open. The 2 brutes pushed inside and turned to Jay and me. Not good, I thought with a tinge of panic. Like David, they had to be assuming we were freedom fighters, or they wouldn't bother to question us at all. Still, they certainly weren't letting the grass grow under their feet. Sure, we tried to blow up the garrison and had blown up the weapons depot, but it hadn't even been a day. I mean, we hadn't planned on being caught, although it had always been a risk. It didn't completely surprise me they were going to ask questions in general, but we were definitely considered more of a threat than David and Stella. The pair had clearly not been worked over. In all, this wasn't going to be pleasant. You, Shorty pointed at Jay. Up. We've got some questions for you. Jay stood slowly and was grabbed by the brutes and tugged from the cell. I leapt up, finally forcing my muscles to respond, but I was too late. The cell door slammed in my face, not that I could have done anything anyway. I pressed against the bars, watching them pull my friend down the hall, tension rippling through me. Damn it, I whispered. I wasn't particularly worried about Jay telling them anything vital, at least not this time, but still. I let out a breath, slumping against the wall. Jez? I looked up, my heart going out to David, who once again looked terrified. Stella wasn't doing much better. She didn't finish her thought. I shrugged, forcing down the guilt, increasing their concern. I'm just worried about all of this. She nodded, glancing at David, and changed the subject. Is it safe for you to tell us the story? She asked. Couldn't it be dangerous for you and Bo and the rest of the freedom fighters? I suppose in some ways it could, I said, like if they decided to ask David the questions instead of Jay and me, I thought. I resolved right then to make sure that never happened. The 3, the people who hated a girl who threw a book, they finally have me. If they find out that's who I am, does it really matter in the long run? At this point, I'm dead anyway. But I'll know to the very end that they got me on my terms, because I fought them all the way. In the past 2 years, I've created more problems for them than I ever would have if they'd left me alone. That's something they can never take from me, no matter what questions they asked or answers they receive. I shrugged again and smiled. And anyway, it is a good story, and will help pass the time. She glanced at the door. Will Jay be all right? I hope so, I said. Stella nodded, and we fell silent as I kept watch for Jay's return. It seemed to take forever until I spotted the 4 of them, Shorty leading the way with 2 brutes hauling Jay between them. My breath caught, and I scrambled to my feet. Jay's head rose. He looked me straight in the eye and shook his head just enough for me to see. I breathed a sigh of relief. That meant two things. There was nothing worse than bruises, and he hadn't said a word. Shorty glared at me as they drew level with the cell door. "Move, prisoner," he snarled. I merely stared at him, keeping my hands down at my sides in an unthreatening gesture. I was curious what the man would do. He glared and inserted the keys, swinging the door open. Before I could have done anything, even if I'd wanted to, the brute shoved Jay into me. I stumbled backwards and let myself fall rather than trip over Stella and David. Jay helped catch both of us, and after a moment of stunned pain radiating from my backside, I dragged myself out from underneath him. The door clanged shut to Shorty's laughter. I managed to glare at him as Jay pulled himself into a sitting position against the wall. As soon as Shorty and the brutes had moved off, I turned to my friend, getting my first good look at him. His right eye was already darkening, and he was in the process of wiping blood from his nose and lip. I suspected he had various other similar bruises that we couldn't see as well. He grinned almost sheepishly at Stella and me through the blood. I scooted forward to help him, but Stella got there first. I raised an eyebrow, unable to help a flash of amusement. Only Jay. His grin widened. Stella now spoke up, her back to me as she dabbed at his bloody lip. "Why don't you continue the story, Jez? If you don't mind, that is." I glanced at David and winked. Should I continue telling it in the third person? Obviously, Jay piped up. It adds so much drama to the telling. I rolled my eyes even as David giggled. "Oh, thank you for your wonderful input." "You asked," he pouted, and that alone convinced me he was fine. "My mistake," I replied dryly, and decided it best to pick up the story before we got into one of our typical arguments, or before he started calling me Jezzy again. Bry's gaze searched her face. "I like it. Jez," he repeated. "I didn't mean to interrupt," Jez said, "but I wanted to tell you, and—" She shrugged. "Sorry, I'll let you get back to it." He stretched out his shoulders. "It's quite all right," he said. "I was almost done anyway." "Where did you learn—" She gestured to try and take in what she'd just witnessed. His smile immediately vanished. "My father. They killed both my parents 8 months ago." She nodded. "I understand to a degree," she said. "My parents are still fine, but, well, you saw what they did to all those people who were just doing their job. Your father must have been a very good sword fighter." That startled a faint smile out of him. He was. He was in the army when he was younger. He took a lot of joy out of teaching my younger brother and me. My brother never took to it like I did, but, he shrugged, I like to think I'm pretty good, although both the captain and Mick could beat me pretty easily if they were ever to try. Reardon too, probably, although he'd rather teach than wield these days. Normally, though, they stick to sparring with each other. Then how do you know they could beat you? He laughed. "Trust me, I've seen them go at each other. They're a whole different skill level." She hesitated as he sheathed his sword. "Will you teach me?" "You do know that this is practical, that you will be called on to use a sword if you know how," he asked softly. Jez knew what he meant. She might well have to kill someone, maybe a lot of someone's, down the line. "Yes," she said firmly. "Reardon started teaching me today, but I'm pretty terrible." He reached out and gently tapped her sling. "That's to be expected, considering you're one-handed right now." "I don't want to have to wait," she said stubbornly. Bryce studied her for a minute and then shrugged. "Then let's not," he said, flashing one of those trademark grins. "Learning one-handed is harder, but I've never been one to tell someone not to challenge themselves. Go grab 2 practice swords and we'll see what you can do, one-handed or not." She brightened and hastened back to the main room where the practice weapons were stored. She grabbed 2. When she returned, he was slowly swinging his sword as if testing out new moves. As soon as Bryce spotted her, he sheathed it again and caught the wooden one she tossed him. He tested its balance, taking a few practice swings. "Ready?" he asked. "As I'll ever be." He stepped forward, starting easy. As Jez blocked using what she'd learned from her father and Reardon earlier in the day, he slowly upped the ante. "Ow!" She shook out her stinging hand a couple minutes later as he snuck through her attempts to guard. He eyed her. "Was today the first time you'd ever trained with a sword?" She made a face. "Pretty much. My father taught me a few tricks when I was younger, but nothing comprehensive." "In that case, color me impressed." "Impressed?" she repeated, certain she had heard him wrong. "Yep. Give me a couple months and you with 2 hands and I'll have you competing with the best in this camp, except maybe the captain. To compete with him, he'd probably have to teach you, and even then, most won't reach his skill." She studied him for a minute. "You're teasing me, aren't you?" she said finally. He grinned. "Most of the time, that would probably be a smart assumption, but this happens to be one of the few times I'm not. You've got some raw skill, Jez, but you're going to need to work at it if you want to be good." He tossed his sword in the air, letting it flip twice before catching it. "Show off," she muttered. He sketched a smug bow. "Of course I am. Captain Bo's the only person I've ever met who isn't, and he only gets away with it because he's a genius, and everyone knows it. Now, let's try that again, and I'll show you where you go wrong. Tomorrow night, I'll teach you some of the named blocks and strikes. Sound good? Sounds great. Thank you. He grinned. My pleasure. After that, every night she joined him after dinner to practice before letting him work at his own level. Some evenings she stayed and watched. Not surprisingly, Bri was the epitome of being unself-conscious. She loved it. Bri was the first real connection she made, other than Beau, but the captain was often busy, so busy that it was hard to find time to talk to him. Although Bri maintained a serious demeanor when they were actually practicing, the rest of the time it was hard to tell if he was serious or joking. It didn't take long for the entire camp to learn her name, but a few insisted on calling her Nona anyway. Bri told her to shrug it off. They're the immature ones. They'll get over it. Then he grinned. Actually, I should have called you Nona right then. Damn it, the one time I'm not on top of the punchline. I would have smacked you. I would have deserved it, he said solemnly. I'll admit it, though. I'm more curious about when you became mature. Now he laughed. Good point. I suppose it had to happen sooner or later. 2 weeks after the first lesson with Bri, Mick appeared at her elbow. The captain would like to speak with you, he said stiffly. Despite the fact she'd been there for almost a month, Mick had definitely not thought out. She wasn't sure if it was her background or what, but he didn't approve. Like with the Nona name, she forced herself to shrug it off. Yes, sir, she said politely and followed Mick to Beau's office. When they reached it, Mick stopped and motioned her past. She glanced at him, but couldn't get a read off his face about why she'd been summoned. She had a fairly good idea, based on what some of the others had said, that everyone got a formal invitation to join at some point, but would have liked confirmation. Beau looked up as she paused just inside the door and favored her with that smile. How were the sword lessons with Bri going? He asked without preamble. Somehow she wasn't surprised he knew. Well enough, I guess. He says I'm a fast learner, but it can be difficult with only one hand, and I guess I leave myself open for retaliation a lot. I'm not sure how much progress I'm making, but he insists it's good, and I suppose he knows better. Mick and I were just talking yesterday. It's probably past time we gave your arm a thorough checkout since it's been a month. How's it feeling? Pretty good. Occasionally a bit sore, but not like it was. Why don't you meet us at the end of lunch, and I'll look at it, he said. That would be great. I'd love to be able to use both my arms again. Now he waved her over, almost looking embarrassed he hadn't yet. Please, have a seat. I'd like to talk to you for a minute, if you have the time. Time is something I have in abundance, she said, amused. She scooped up some paper off one of the extra chairs and straightened it, plopping it in her lap as she sat. That is something we can hopefully fix soon, he said, leaning back in his chair and regarding her somberly. As I'm sure you've noticed, we're a relatively small group, and I'm afraid we don't have a lot of detail on who the enemy is that we face yet. Considering their first fairly successful move was the assassinations, we have no names or faces. However, we do know that they're quite powerful. There have been small actions for years, many of which have been bested by the high castles. The assassins' allies and bosses, like we talked about early on. Precisely, he said. The fact that they could kill 4 out of the 6 most powerful dukes in Tira proves that they're getting ready to make a move. We've been aware of the growing threat to Tira since before I was born, but it's obvious they've been searching for leadership for most of that time. I'm afraid they've actually found it now. With less than 200 people, there's not a lot we can do to prevent anything. And you're afraid they'll hit Oakbridge next. I'm almost certain they'll hit Oakbridge next, he corrected, a deep sadness flitting across his face so quickly Jez almost missed it. I can see the writing on the wall, and there's nothing we can do. She let out a breath. Nothing is ever easy, Beau. We won't give up, though, and our time will come. Whoever they are, her gut clenched as she realized that they could do nothing. And in doing nothing, it was like they were condemning the king and prince to death. Her mind flashed to her own brother Colin, who was a soldier in Northwind. Colin was right in the way of anyone trying to remove the rest of the dukes and the royal family from the picture. Beau patted her hand. I know, but it's not a choice we really have, he said softly. Why would anyone... I just don't understand. We don't know enough to warn them? Nothing specific. My network is too small. It's as much a gut feeling as anything confirmed on paper. Not only that, but why would they believe us? And I do believe the king has some inklings that things are not well, he said, gesturing at the full desk. They both went silent, staring at the jumble. We? He asked finally. Absolutely, she said. They took everything from me without a second thought. And worse, they killed people because of me. Almost killed my best friend. They did the same to Brian, who knows how many others here. Probably most of them. I'm in for as long as it takes, Beau. I can't go back. You were right about that, and I don't think I could anyway, not after seeing this. Not after knowing about the threat. Not after the last month. She ran a hand over her short hair, feeling the scars it was only just beginning to cover. There's no going back knowing what I know. I just wish it was possible to protect everyone. He smiled grimly and offered his hand. Welcome to, here, an almost grimace crossed his face, the freedom fighters, Jez. She raised an eyebrow, unable to help herself. Okay, you mentioned being the freedom fighters was new. What's the deal? It's Bry's fault. He dubbed us that shortly before we rescued you, and it has unfortunately stuck. I tried to explain that Patrick Highcastle is still king, and it seems a bit inaccurate, but he argued that it wouldn't be forever, so we might as well get used to calling ourselves that. The others agreed we needed a name, and no one could do better. Jez giggled, covering her mouth. I'm sorry, but that, I suppose we're truly stuck with it? I think so. I feel like I should apologize for him. A real smile itched at the corner of Beau's mouth. If you start now, you'll find it a full-time job, so I wouldn't try. Good point. For a moment, they stayed silent, and Jez was glad the mood had lightened. Finally, Beau shifted, all business again. Keep rotating between groups until you find some place to stick. Trust me, we're pretty tight-knit here, but it will get easier. Bry will help with that. I'm sure he already has. She nodded. He's introduced me to a lot of people, and it's nice to have a set place to sit at meals. Good. Glad to hear it. I promise Mick will eventually lighten up as well. He's worried about me. Protective of me, Beau corrected. He has a hard time with new people, but he'll get there. She grinned. I won't take up any more of your time, since I know it's a lot more precious than mine. Thanks. You're welcome. I'm glad you're staying. Me too, she said, feeling suddenly cheerful as she bounced to her feet, throwing a wave over her shoulder. Beau groaned in her wake, although she caught it anyway. Bry's already rubbing off on her. Jez burst into laughter as she headed out. You weren't supposed to hear that, he yelled, only making her laugh harder. Sorin waved the guard off and turned the deadbolt on Renier's door before pushing it open. The prince sat in the chair by the window, although he turned at the sound of the door. Sorin, he said neutrally. Hello, Ren. After a heartbeat of silence, Ren scowled. Do you want something? I hadn't visited in a while. I wanted to see how you were getting on. To be honest, Sorin was a bit disturbed by how old and tired the prince looked. He and Ren were the same age, their birthdays only a couple months apart. Same as last time. Bored, mostly. Sorin frowned, tilting his head. Are the books not enough? There's only so much time I can spend reading. There was a dullness to his tone that made Sorin itch. Then why don't I give you something else to think about? Ren eyed him. Oh? Do you have a younger sibling? Again, silence reigned, although this time the other man stared. Excuse me? Ren finally managed. Do you have a younger sibling? God's breath, Sorin. You'd think someone might have noticed sometime in the last 20 or so years if I did. It's not as far-fetched as you might think. I think I'd know if I had a brother or sister. How old were you when your mother vanished? Ren's eyes narrowed as if he could suddenly see where Sorin was going with this. About 4. And my mother didn't vanish. She was killed. That's what your father told you, and everyone. A flash of anger darted across Ren's face, and he tensed, but managed to pull in whatever he was going to say. Yes, that's what happened. For a moment, Sorin debated not pushing, but if there was another Highcastle, he had to know. And even if Ren didn't know it consciously, maybe he'd seen something when he'd been younger. It has never occurred to you that your father might have lied to you for her safety, or perhaps that of their unborn child? You were barely more than a toddler, Ren. If he had told you the truth, do you honestly think you would have been able to keep it a secret at that age? My mother died, he said flatly. Those are the facts as we know them, Sorin agreed. He decided it was best not to mention the fact he was almost certain that if Elizabeth Highcastle had actually died, it hadn't been them. But there's a logic here. He perched on the edge of the man's bed to look him in the eye. You've said that your father saw us coming long before Vladimir took control. Wouldn't it be possible that he sent your mother and unborn sibling away for their safety, and then lied to the world to keep them safe? He could see the struggle on Ren's face as the other man worked to keep his anger in check, and not admit the possibility Sorin presented. Where is this coming from? The prince asked finally. I've been analyzing our encounters with the freedom fighters, as sparse as they've been, and the overall style they use is identical to that of your father. That makes no sense. Even if what you say is true, their leader could not have been trained by father. But that doesn't mean they couldn't have been trained in the same style. Damn it, Sorin, Ren said, but he sounded more tired than angry. What do you want from me? Is it possible I'm right? His jaw worked. It might be possible. Sorin nodded, looking past Ren, wondering what to do with this potential information. So far, he had not told Vladimir. Okay, thank you, he said after a minute, and stood, turning to the door. If you're right, the prince said, so quietly Sorin almost missed it. If you're right, then that means my father sacrificed my safety and my life for that of my unborn sibling. Guilt slammed Sorin hard in the chest, making breathing impossible for a few heartbeats as he paused. He knew a thing or two about sacrificing safety and life for family. No, I don't think so, he said, once he'd regained his breath and glanced over his shoulder, meeting Ren's devastated gaze. I think the king needed an heir, and I think he banked on us needing you. And then, to give you a chance in the form of a built-in automatic resistance. Whatever you do, Ren, if I'm right, don't hold this against them. Don't let it destroy any remaining chance you have with your family. Before Ren could respond, Sorin took the last 2 steps and shut the door behind himself. He paused, head leaning back against the solid wood, before he first deep breath and headed back to his office.